Good morning. I was thinking to myself 10 years ago, if we had done a panel on data centers, I wonder how many people would have showed up. And partly because people were probably trying to figure out the difference between a data center and a call center. But also, I think this attendance today and probably all that you hear about data centers in the market just speaks to how much the industry has changed. So I'm David Liggitt. I'm very excited to be here with you this morning and get to lead this discussion. When Hunter Lee kind of thought about this event and talked to me about putting it together, we started thinking through who could be here that would provide a really good perspective on where we are in the market today. And these were three individuals that we thought would do a great job. So I am going to actually introduce them instead of having them introduce themselves, because I've actually worked with them for about the last 20 years. So sitting to my right here is Anthony Bolner. Anthony's Executive Vice President and Partner at Stream Data Centers. And I would tell you that Anthony's been really instrumental with the Stream leadership team on transforming their business from a data center one-by-one development company to a national data center operator, competing for the largest deals in the U.S. And so he's really become, one of the faces of Stream's data center business. But more importantly, he's a Texas Aggie. I know that you would get excited about that. Get it out. Yep. And even better than that, he's a granddad.
I am a granddad.
Of two, with two on the way. So Anthony, glad you're here. This is Brant. Now you might be surprised he does not have a guitar or a ukulele in his lap. Because we've been at a dinner before where he's had a ukulele in his lap, but he's Senior Vice President at CBRE. He leads the Data Center Solutions team in North Texas, has been part of that leadership team now for a long time, was a partner of Trammell Crow, started Rack House Group, but now an expert in site selection, co-location leasing. Brant is one of the ones at the forefront of getting deals done across the U.S. And works with data center operators and tenants across the country. And then sitting far on my right here is Bryan Loewen. Bryan is founder and managing partner of CSR Capital Partners. He has over 30 years of experience, about 30 years of experience in the space. Started in the technology business, but got into the commercial real estate side in 2004 with GBA Colley. Spent 10 years as executive managing director at Newmark. And now is basically leading on the investment side of things, value-added co-location investment opportunities, as well as carrier hotel investment opportunities. So he's raised a lot of money. He's raising more money as we speak, and so I'm very excited. And then I'm David Liggitt, founder and president of DatacenterHawk. Started in the data center space with CBRE for 8 years, and then started our platform, which is a subscription-based platform that allows data center investors, users, owners to understand the markets around supply, demand, absorption, trends in the space. And so we're very excited to be here with you this morning. And one of the great, I think, values of this time together is the different perspectives that you'll hear. So, Anthony comes at it from a data center operator, an owner perspective. Brant is working with end users, trying to figure out where to go and why to go certain places. And then Bryan is working on the investment side. So I hope today you get to walk out of here with a really good understanding of what's taking place in the market and where the opportunities are. I'm going to give 3 data points, and then we're going to jump into the discussion. So one is, one of the major changes in the U.S. data center market, and really across the world, has been the further adoption of AI. And I'm sure you've seen the news, but that is having a dramatic impact on the data center market as a whole. It's having a dramatic impact on the U.S. data center market when compared to Europe, APAC, Latin America. It's happening mostly in the U.S. right now. And it's having a dramatic impact on Dallas, this city. So that's the first thing. The second is that Dallas is the third largest data center market in the U.S. So we've got about 2 gigawatts. And if you haven't had your coffee yet, that's 2,000 megawatts of commissioned power, either by co-location operators, so Digital Realty, CyrusOne, QTS, operators like that, or companies that build, own, and operate their own data centers. And these are typically bigger companies like Microsoft or Amazon or Google or Meta, those type of companies. So Dallas is the third largest data center market in the U.S., and it continues to grow. And then third, the geographic focus of the Dallas data center market has shifted considerably in the last 5 to 10 years. And I would say that when I started in the space, Deals were being done in Richardson, Plano, far north Dallas, Alliance, and now that's shifted considerably. Okay, so I wanted to provide those as a backdrop for the discussion. So Anthony, we'll start with you. Talk about Dallas and maybe even the geographic shifts and how that's impacting data center operators, people that are building, owning, and then providing the services to the end users.
Well, thank you, David. Great kind of three prefacing comments, because I think that those really are the fundamentals of what's going on in the data center market here in Dallas and really North America. I will say Dallas as a top 3 data center market, Dallas has always been in the top 5 for the last, call it 20 years. But the market has changed drastically. So even as recently as 10 years ago, we were all focused on enterprise and some cloud companies, but a lot of the demand we saw was coming from enterprise users 10, 12, 15 years ago. And by enterprise users, I mean healthcare companies, financial services companies, technology companies that were trying to solve for their own data center needs. And a lot of that was going into this newly created market that we called outsourced data centers or co-location. Digital Realty, CyrusOne were early providers in that. And Dallas was always a very strong market for that enterprise user. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we started seeing our first cloud users. And the cloud growth, of course, is well documented and talked about. And then AI and the growth of AI is as recent as really in the last 3 to 5 years. So, we've seen massive change, and all of that has certainly affected Dallas. The quick highlight on Dallas, and I'll turn it over to Brant, who really is the real estate guy on the panel, even though I think we all pretend to be real estate guys. This growth of South Dallas and what has driven South Dallas is kind of the primary data center market in the Dallas market. And I'll kick it to you at that point, Brant. Maybe let you talk about South Dallas and the data center land, et cetera.
Yeah, thanks. It is a crazy market. I've said a lot of times that this has been the biggest shift. I've been in the real estate business for a long time, 40 years, and the shift from a tenant's market to a landlord's market has been unprecedented, and truly mean that there has never been anything like it. It's a remarkable time to be in this space, and it's a little bit scary and wonky because it's hard to figure out. It changes so often. But I will say, and our numbers are a little bit different than David at CBRE, just because we track them a little bit differently. And my daughter and my partner, Phoebe Bernet, who's right there, is, among 1,000 other things, our analyst. And she, so we're tracking 600 megawatts of co-location space that's on the ground, currently leased. And it's effectively 100% leased. There's really no vacancy. Some of the vacancy that's out there will probably never get leased. There's another 600 megawatts that is under construction right now and will probably all deliver by the end of next year, so by the end of 26. It's 95% pre-leased. There is no space. It's an unbelievable market. So if you just take that piece of it and you look at our market, second or third or fourth largest market, depending on how you look at it, in the country, that's a 1.2 gigawatt market. And right now in South Dallas, Encore tells us that they have 38 gigawatts of requests for power, 38 times our current market in interest in Dallas. It's truly, it's unprecedented. And just to go back to what Bolner was saying, Dallas is an interesting market. The growth has been originally kind of downtown and then Richardson, And North Dallas is mired a little bit by the Eastern District, which we won't get into that, but there's some research that you guys can follow on that. So the leasing is a little slower there, probably way overblown. The city center or infill land is really hard to find big chunks of land and power. If you go west, there's a lot of oil and gas that you've got to manipulate around and kind of figure out. And if you go east, there's some floodplain and there's some, the fiber's not as great. So what we've seen, and AB just said this, is this unbelievable shift to South Dallas, where, I mean, we're tracking probably, I wish Phoebe was up here with me, but probably 80 different sites in South Dallas alone that are earmarked as data centers. And I know we'll get into power in a little bit. That's a whole nother story that has been crazy intriguing lately, but it's a great market. There is a lot of good space. It's flat. Most of it's out of the floodplain. Ingress, egress is great. We predict that Texas will be the largest data center market in the world in the next 10 years.
Bryan, when an investor hears something is 95% pre-leased, number one, what does that say to you about a market like that? And then also, two, what are the other opportunities from an investor's perspective, in the data center market? Given Brant's comment about just the incredible growth at the larger end, but what are some of the other things that you've seen from an investment side?
Yeah, I'll tell you most of the investments we're talking about when we talk about cloud and these artificial intelligence factories. I think the terminology that's most often used is hyperscale data centers. And I view the hyperscale data centers kind of in binary risk, where you got Google, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, NVIDIA, a handful of names, 5 to 10 companies that are driving nearly 100% of the hyperscale demand. So to me, in order to participate in the pre-leasing activities, for example, you have to speculate on land, speculate on power, in advance of trying to land one of those 5 to 10 companies. So it's not necessarily 100% pre-lease. I think there's a lot of speculation that comes. So it's not just I think the nomenclature there's no risk involved. There is risk involved in these activities. Yeah. So that's not the area I'm focused on. I'm focused on more of the multi-tenant co-location, the highly interconnected buildings like the Dallas Infomart type buildings with lots of fiber optic lines. And I will tell you that the global 5,000 companies are still starving for capacity. And there's still a lot of opportunity from an investor perspective servicing the companies that Stream and QTS and Digital Realty kind of built their businesses on a decade or two ago.
Yeah, if you think of our space as a spectrum, related to like smaller users and larger users, historically most of the capital was spent down on the smaller to mid-size range. 5 to 6 years ago, it really dramatically shifted. And now the capital needs at the larger end are so large that most of the capital is headed at, or is pointed towards working with larger end users. And so there are opportunities, as Bryan mentioned, in this mid to smaller range, of investment, of obviously buying, facilities, building for smaller end users. Let's talk about power, surprise. Let's talk about how Dallas and maybe Texas as a whole, compares to the rest of the U.S. One of the things that we have seen is power companies really trying to get their arms around a 38 times, projection, as Brant mentioned, of demand. Historically, that power load has been very consistent in different markets, and over the last several years, it's looked like this. And so these companies are really trying to get their arms around, hey, how do we serve our communities? How do we serve the business opportunities? And then also, too, how do we balance that with the residential communities and the other things that we're seeing? So maybe let's, Anthony, why don't you talk about that? Because you're...
So Stream Data Centers, as an example, in 2010, 2012, we were building data centers that were basically 3 megs to scale to 6 megawatts. So that was kind of our fastball, and it goes back to being focused on enterprise users, healthcare, financial services. Today, we are out building campuses that have 40 megawatt footprint buildings, 40 megawatt per building, that scale to as many as 7 buildings on on one campus. So literally that's a roughly 300 megawatt campus, and there's, additional power needed for cooling and things like that. So you're out looking for 400 to 500 megawatts in one location. So you can imagine these utility power companies, and 3 or 4 years ago, they were looking at you in shock and awe. Today, they're trembling and asking you to put down large deposits and fill out large request forms and load ramps and things, because utility power companies have just had, have become much more sophisticated by all of these requests. And the requests, the numbers that Brant threw out are exactly right. Just digest that for a second. We've got roughly 2 gigs existing in the Dallas market everywhere. That's all co-location and self-builds. And Encore is being asked for another 38 gigs, and frankly, I've even heard larger numbers than 38. So it's this massive influx of requests to these utility power companies, in all fairness, who have been doing this for 100 years, and now their whole world has changed. So it really is, the strange new world we live in, and they're trying to figure out what's real, because a lot of these requests are coming from maybe a landowner who has owned the land for a long time, or maybe that request is coming from a investor buyer who's just trying to line up land in order to potentially sell it on to an operator, a developer, et cetera. So there's a lot going on there in the data center land market, which is driving a lot of unknowns, I would say, in the data center power market.
One thing I'll just kind of, you're talking about a lot of megawatts, and just to conceptualize what Anthony's talking about, a 100 megawatt data center, he's talking about 300 megawatt plus, it requires about $1 billion or more of capital from a real estate perspective. So these are very, very highly intensive, capital intensive projects from a real estate perspective before the tenant puts a single penny of their finished out dollars inside of this. So that's, again, we're talking, the numbers have gotten very large, and then the entire Texas grid, last year, I think the peak demand for the entire ERCOT grid was 85 gigawatts.
Yeah.
So we're talking about 38, 40 gigawatts of capacity that's being applied for in South Dallas on the Encore part of it. So again, these are staggering numbers that it's almost hard to really fathom when we're talking in a real estate perspective.
I failed to mention, in just a few minutes, we're going to open it up for questions. So as we're talking, if there's questions that come up in your head, just park them and we'll get to it. But Brant, as you're working with end users and even data center operators, how are you reconciling this with the power companies and working with them to get things done?
And to go back to AB, what AB said, and Bryan just said, 35 gigawatt or 38 gigawatts is South Dallas. I think the Encore system is 100 gigawatts of requests right now, currently. Yeah. I just want to back up and say, because I love Texas and I love what Texas is doing. It's ERCOT and Encore and the others can't help what's happening with this crazy amount of attraction to our market. But as we work around the country with our clients that are looking for power, and you've heard this story over and over again, I won't pick on any markets because we're trying to be friends with all of them, but on many of them, the major markets and even the tertiary markets where nobody had experienced this kind of demand in the past, they were willy-nilly saying, you bet, how much power you need? 50 megawatts here, 80 megawatts here, you got it. They'd sign whatever document it was, an FEA, some promise to give that power, and all of a sudden, overnight, it was like, we can't give out all that power. And the same thing started happening in Texas 18 months ago or 2 years ago, and ERCOT and Encore in particular got together and said, we've got to shut things down. We need to look at what's going on here because we have constituents that need to run their air conditioning at their home in the summer. And heat their house in the winter, and we can't just do what has happened in some of these other markets. So for a full year, Oncor did not give out any power to data centers, and all those requests kept piling up. And 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, there were a lot of phone calls and a lot of tense conversations about we're going to give you some power, but it's a fraction of what you asked for, or we're not going to give you any power and you're going to be in the second queue. And all those things are affecting the dynamics of, frankly, everything in our world, including land and the cost of power and timing and all those other things. I don't think I answered your question, but I wanted to pop that out there. I don't think I was even close to answering your question.
Well, you weren't, but that's okay.
Okay.
No, I wanted you to talk about, you are dealing with end users themselves, and you're dealing with data center operators that are saying, hey, we want to expand, we want to grow. We want to grow in Texas. We want to grow in South Dallas. We want to grow maybe further north, even along like the I-35 corridor. So how are you working with them to navigate all of these, situations to make sure that they still can grow here? Because I think from my perspective, the situation you just described is very consistent across every power market right now, which is them trying to really figure out how they can serve the communities well and how they can do that. So it's not specific to Texas. I think what it shows is that there's a lot of demand, there's a lot of interest here. How do you help groups go, hey, even in the midst of this, you can have a site here. You can, have a 100 megawatt site. How do you do that?
Well, it's a great question, and it's we're all learning that together right now. It's funny how timing happens. As everyone started to get the phone calls from Oncor a couple of years ago, if you look at Dallas and you look at the Infomart and you draw a 30-mile ring around the Infomart, there hasn't been a single deal in Dallas done outside of that 30-mile ring. And there's latency issues, and that's changing a little bit now, but historically, if you look at a map, Google is at 27 miles and Facebook is at 28 miles, and everybody wanted to be close to that city center of the Infomart. And when there became these big restrictions just a few weeks ago, and even before that, as Oncor was saying, we got to figure out transmission and how we're going to actually get power to you. Power started going outside of that 30-mile, or tenants started going outside of that 30-mile ring to find power. And so we've got a site that we're proud of that we list down in Wichita Falls, which is about 90, maybe 100 miles north and west of Dallas. And we can't answer all the calls that we're getting because there's a lot of power. There's a gigawatt of power that we believe is going to be delivered on that site. You look at what the Skybox guys have done in Hutto, which is the restrictions that we found with Austin Energy, Austin Power. It's not Austin Power. That would be a great name for whatever it is. The Austin Group inside of Austin proper it was so curtailed that you started seeing things happen in Pflugerville and Hutto and these other markets. And I think you were just having to bob and weave. And we had clients that for years would tell us, go to Dallas because we want the people, we want the tech talent in Dallas. We'll follow the tech talent, the big markets, the big primary markets, and then we'll figure out how to get power to us. And now it is a complete flip. It's a 180 of that. It is take us to the power in Timbuktu, wherever that is, and we will figure out how to run our company around that. So it really has been a shift away from kind of blob mentality, we'll just go where everybody else is, to let's be really careful about going and finding that new chunk of power, almost wherever that is.
Yeah, the power is really leading where people are looking right now. And I'm sure many in the room, whether you're on the brokerage side of things or even just in the title business or whatever it is, you see that with the projects that you're working on. The markets have shifted quite a bit. Brant talked about that 30-mile ring. That's all centered on typically a building in each market, and he was specifically mentioning the Infomart, which we would call in our little data center world a carrier hotel. But Bryan, just talk about the importance of that. Like what is the ecosystems created there? And each city across the U.S. typically has one of these buildings that most of these data center facilities try to tie back to. But just talk about that and why that's important and how that impacts the market.
Yeah, absolutely. We have 6 of these carrier hotels in our portfolio. I definitely love investing in. I think these, if you look at the distributed network of data centers, you kind of have the hyperscalers, and then as you get closer to the city centers, you have the wholesale co-location sites that are typically 20 to 30 miles outside of the carrier hotels. And the carrier hotels are the ground zero. So we measure stuff, it's usually fiber miles from the carrier hotel. In Dallas, it's 1950 Stemmons Avenue. There's a couple other in this market, but that's the primary site. And these are the convergence, or the confluence point of basically all the fiber optic lines in a given marketplace, usually converge into a single building. In really large markets like Dallas or New York, you might find there's 2 or 3 or 4 of these buildings. But in most markets, there's a single building. And this is really the internet exchange point. All the data in these given marketplaces are really going through a handful of very mission-critical buildings. And I think this is kind of almost like the lost secret sauce in the data center space. I mean, these buildings don't oftentimes look like the ones you would expect. They're urban, oftentimes multi-story buildings, and they're not making new ones. So that's the other thing, that you're not seeing developers, create new carrier hotel data centers. And these are, again, I think just it's the heartbeat of the internet in any given marketplace.
Yeah, I just would add to that, because I forgot that y'all had so much in your portfolio, but it is, I think it's the stickiest real estate of any, because once you get into that ecosystem, it's really, really, really hard to get out. And the Infomart, I think, has, I'm going to totally misquote it, but 60 maybe different fiber providers coming into the building, and then inside of there, everybody's connected, and it's really hard to get away from that, or Cermak in Chicago, or One Wilshire in LA, and so it's just a fascinating.
Even in today's cap rate markets, we're still seeing these trade. It could be 3.5 to 4.5 cap rate on a carrier hotel, because there's built-in growth. The fiber interconnectivity people charge for these fiber. If you're connecting a Netflix to an AT&T, you're paying a monthly charge, about $300 just for a passive fiber optic connection. And in these buildings, without zero power having to grow, they're still going to grow on an annualized basis, which makes these very sticky. And to Brant's point, the tenants in these buildings, they never leave. I mean, they're virtually impossible to get out of.
Yeah, funny story, I told one of our analysts at our company, I said, hey, one day when I've got some extra time, I'd like to write a one-pager on each carrier hotel, the history of it, how it started, and just really, so people can really understand the space. And about 20 minutes later, he came back and he said, hey, I got on ChatGPT, and I put in, write a thing on this, and he's like, I've got it here, I'll print it off for you. Oh, things are changing quickly. So I wanted Bryan to bring that up and talk about the importance of connectivity, because our space, obviously, power is the leading indicator right now on where projects are going. But there's also other things that are important to data centers being able to function correctly. We mentioned the talent, certainly right now, construction talent, electricians. I mean, there's a lot of, you can put a data center anywhere, but when you start to move it outside of the normal environments that they've typically been constructed in, you create other challenges. And so talk about that. What are the challenges of moving outside to Wichita Falls, to Abilene, Texas? I'm sure many of you know there's a very large data center project happening right there. Yeah. There's other places in Texas where it's taking place, but if you move it out of an area like Dallas, what are some of the challenges that you face?
So, maybe taking a step back and looking at it from a macro, data center incentives from states and counties are important more to the end user than they are to us as the developer. I mean, they're important to us as a developer because they're important to the end user, but the end users invest so much money into the hardware in these data centers that the personal property tax abatements that they can get from the state of Texas is very, very important to them. And there are certain states that don't even have a personal property tax. So, you know, Oregon or et cetera, several states in the Pacific Northwest. So the cost of power is important. I would tell you it's probably not as important or such a focus as it was probably 5 years ago, just because finding power has become almost more important than the cost of power. But there are, you know, other key factors that I think have allowed Texas and North Texas to be one of the key data center markets in the country, and I do agree with Brant, will continue to be, because Northern Virginia has always been the largest data center market, not only in North America, but in the world. You want to talk about power constraints and power issues and even land constraints and land use issues and even community pushback saying, we've had enough data centers here. And we are fortunate here in Texas to have, you know, ample land and also large pieces of beef served on our breakfast plate, which, thank you, Trek.
Best part of this morning.
I thought that was a brand muffin from when I walked up to the table, but my goodness, thank you.
Life is good.
Life is good.
So let me ask you guys this, and then we'll ask some questions. So if you have questions, please get them ready. You know, people that have heard about this market but haven't been able to get involved, how do they do that? You know, when I started in the space back in 2008-ish, I was always surprised that we weren't seeing more people get into the market, and there's certainly reasons for that. I think now that the data center industry has shifted, I think it's a lot more visible, which years and years ago was invisible. But how do people in this room get plugged into the data center space?
You want me
Go ahead.
to take a stab at it? I think, first of all, we get easily 10 phone calls a week saying, I have got a ranch in West Texas, and there's a line that goes over that it looks like a power line, I think, and it's perfect for data center land. And you're like, no, it's not really all that perfect for data center land because it's got floodplain, ingress, egress is bad. There's so many things, and so to your question, a lot of people are trying to get into the business, and it is a super tight business, as you know, from an investor right now. It's a really tight community, but I do think for young people in the real estate business, there are a ton of opportunities in this space, from the co-location companies like an Equinix, or a Digital, or a QTS, or a Stream, or Skybox, and the list of names go on, and we are a hotbed for those young, not so much Bolner anymore, but young, energetic growth groups that are really going to change the way this whole industry is. The finance side, debt and equity.
General contractors.
Yeah, general contract. Yeah,
Give a shout out to RO, the name sponsor.
Right.
Merriman. No, but seriously, there are so many on the design side, the GC side, the legal side, the brokerage side. But there are so many good, young, talented people in this industry that probably weren't in this industry 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So there is a
Great
lot.
time to get into.
Great time and a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, and I think our industry will need people joining, because we're unable to keep up with what's happening right now, just from the logistics of not only building and facilitating the growth, but also all the other positions that are mentioned. So this is kind of an informal sales pitch for the industry, but it's a really fascinating space to be in. And I would tell you, the four of us have never seen it at the moment it's in right now. This is a new world. We've been to conferences for years where we've talked about things that would impact the space, that are going to change the market, that are totally going to shift demand, and all these things are going to happen, very small changes. 3 years ago, AI started to become front and center, and you can see in our numbers the hockey stick growth. So there's headwinds, there's things that are out there that could shift things, but I would tell you that our market in the U.S., and probably Texas too, can't even do a third of what is planned right now, let alone all of it. So it's a really exciting time to be in our market. It's really fun to get to, I think, connect with other people in the real estate business that are serving the space in different ways. And I think there's going to be opportunities here for the next many years. So let's pause. Let's ask if there's any questions. We'd love to try to answer. I don't know if there's a microphone that will make its way. There we go. Yes, right there. So here's one right here in the middle, and we'll put our best people on it here.
Yep.
Hi. What areas of the data center market do you see the most innovation coming in?
I think the question, what areas of the data center market do we see the most innovation? Okay.
We're going to need breakthroughs in power. I mean, flat out, there has to be breakthroughs in the way of power. It's the generation of power, whether it's nuclear. You can't have it from just wind and solar, but battery is going to be very important in this. I think the distribution of the power also has to be solved in many aspects. I mean, we've used copper wires for the most part for the last 100 years in the distribution of power. There's going to be breakthroughs on that side it has to take place, and I think the U.S. is in a good position from just from a think tank perspective to lead that across the global industry.
Yeah, my two quick hits would be power generation, and that could mean on-site natural gas generation, which is certainly being talked about everywhere and a lot here in Texas. I will tell you right now, the big users who have sustainability goals and environmental concerns are questioning it. It's inevitable. It's going to happen at some point. But the other thing is mechanical design and how data centers are cooled and how data centers can be cooled more efficiently using direct liquid to the chip, which is called DLC. So those are kind of the two biggest areas.
Well, and to your point on the cooling, we've shifted from pretty standard cabinets that are 5 kilowatts per cabinet. And you cool that one particular way. When you get to 10 or 15 or 20 kilowatts per cabinet, you got to cool it a different way. And when you get to where we are today, where it's 135, 150, 200 kilowatts per cabinet, it's a whole new ball game. You have to actually take liquid and get it inside the computer and go to the chip and cool it that way. And it's just, I think cooling is probably where you're seeing most of the innovation, giving a nod, obviously, to power, because that's all we care about.
And hold on. Sorry, one more thing I would add is the AI training models, you will see innovation, and that will have an impact on our space.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Nope.
We can hear you without it, probably.
Yeah. You mentioned power generation. Can you talk about behind-the-meter power generation on site, and is that something, Anthony, that you're looking at? Are you seeing more requests for that? How do you think that plays out?
Yeah, the question is around behind-the-meter power generation and how that will play out. Go ahead, guys.
Right, so behind-the-meter power generation means you're not putting the power onto the grid. You're putting the power directly into the data center, into the building, which is being talked about everywhere. And going back to my nat gas on-site generation is really what we're talking. There's other ways to do it, thermal, there's on-site nuclear, which there was an article in the paper this weekend about, and big dollars, lining up behind that. I do think, and again, it's still early, we're not seeing it in place, but we're hearing and studying it literally every day.
When we used to do site selection requests, this is 10 years ago. Actually, Brant and I were probably doing these together. It was how far can you be away from a nuclear reactor? Now the industry is buying those nuclear reactors. There's been a significant shift in risk analysis and what these companies have become more open to given the changes in power. But I think it's really interesting to watch. You've had a lot of companies a lot of these bigger users over the last several years that have had some pretty large sustainability goals that they want to hit. And now they have this really big opportunity with AI. And so they won't be able to do both. So there will be a shift in, a number of things in order to figure out, hey, do we want to, really win these business opportunities, or do we want to hit those sustainability goals, because you can't do both?
One add-on to that just is that I think that we're hearing that a lot, especially the natural gas piece of it. It's just fraught with a lot of difficulties, non-attainment zones, and making sure that if you were doing that in a non-attainment zone, which all of South Dallas is, even if you can get the power, it's not easy to get the air right, the approvals just for particulates in the air, and so it sounds awesome. It's just not easy.
Yep. Okay. Question.
Hunter,
you got her. She's got
okay.
back here with the mic.
Hi, thanks for your remarks. So I've heard from a couple of people on the financing side of things that there might not be enough interested capital to handle all the exits from these investments. Is that a thing, and is that a concern?
Okay, I heard capital and investments. Go ahead.
Well, I think you're talking about on the hyperscale specifically. I think there is a concern about exits. We're talking about these 100, 300 megawatts, gigawatt sites. We're talking $100 million or $1 billion of real estate to go into a single transaction. So I love having Microsoft coupon on a 10-year lease or a 15-year lease. Don't get me wrong. There is an exit for it. But I think the question is there an exit for all these projects? And that's still a to be determined. We haven't, there were 5 public companies, 5 public REITs just a handful of years ago. Now there's 2 public REITs. The privates are larger than the public REITs at this stage. So how this capital needs to get recycled, I think there will be some challenges if you're building these hyperscale data centers on the exits. It's still something that the market has yet to figure out. It'll take sovereigns or large insurance funds. I'm not sure even the IPO markets can really handle the development capital that's needed for these large hyperscale projects.
Hunter, Lee, you have a microphone?
Hello. Yes, I do.
How about that?
His own microphone.
I know you guys are all really good about only watering your yards twice a week and following the restrictions and all that. Would you guys just talk for a second about, we have a finite water supply in North Texas, and I think these things use a lot of it. So just how does that play out?
All right, good question. We often get, it's the first question especially when you go into maybe a new city that hasn't had a data center before, or a new county in maybe a different market. And the first question a lot of times is water. What are the water needs? And fortunately, at least in our co-location as a developer, we always use air-cooled chillers and a closed loop. Even when we talk about direct liquid to the chip, it's still a closed loop. So we're not evaporating water in order to reject heat or create cooled air. So the data centers that we build do not use a lot of water. Literally, most of the water that we use is in sinks and toilets. The water in our cooling systems is never evaporated. Now, there are data centers, just like there are hospitals, that have big, not air-cooled, chilled water evaporative cooling towers behind some very large data centers here, primarily controlled by end users, so there are still some data centers that use water, so it still gets asked about. It's still a concern. But I will tell you, in Texas and in the Western U.S., it's a non-starter. You can't build a data center in Texas or in Phoenix, for example, that would use a lot of water.
Yep, I agree.
Okay.
The trend, because of the pressure, is going towards the air-cooled closed-loop system.
Yeah, but I think the question brings up kind of a bigger concept in our industry right now, which is, our industry is a heavy infrastructure industry. And so, there are limited resources everywhere. So the data center industry has to figure out, and is in a process, and you can see it probably in news articles, on how to work well with communities to make sure that we can deliver infrastructure that, does not hurt the community but helps the community. And I think the data centers industry certainly has gotten better at communicating that, has gotten better at being part of the community. Years ago, they would just, a data center facility would move into a market and wouldn't interact with the community at all. So it's very different than a 250-person office, building going in, and there's jobs being created. The data center space does create jobs, a lot of construction jobs, but less jobs that are going to run the facility. And so the data center industry has to work more holistically to figure out how we're going to do this, because if not, you won't get a gigawatt of demand done, let alone 38. It's a process that the market has to do.
Yeah, and I think what's lost on that whole argument is the phenomenal amount of tax dollars that are generated that will build new schools and repair roads and do all the things that are necessary that you get with this asset class that is far and above any other cost per square foot.
And the other challenge is that people that are protesting it on social media have to realize that they're using the exact thing that they're protesting against.
Right.
Is there a question over here? Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, David. To the question that Colin asked about behind the meter, are you seeing clients looking at that also from the standpoint of bad actors, taking control of the grid and shutting power down to the data centers, and so therefore behind the meter self-generation at site would kind of mitigate that risk? Are you seeing that or being asked to that?
No, I mean, candidly, we haven't, there's threats that we all have to be aware of, to data centers, and really what you're talking about is, kind of the worst kind, someone who's going to do something to the power grid, or someone who's going to do, yes, it's something we all should be aware of, and, that all, to me, falls under the whole heading of cybersecurity, et cetera. I mean, weather's a threat. Tornadoes, et cetera. So there are threats that we have to design against and be aware of, but I wouldn't, in a cautiously optimistic way, I would tell you it's not something that drives a decision like that in our minds.
Most of these data centers have 24/7, 365 generator backup too. So these are designed to stay off the grid.
That's true.
For basically entirety, as long as you can get the fuel being redelivered to these sites. There's a lot more susceptibility to other aspects of our everyday life for that kind of nefarious actions than probably a data center.
Let's maybe take one more question. Are there any others? Maybe back there in the back.
Hi there. So what kind of regulatory barriers are you all seeing as it pertains to maybe utilities regulations? Because sometimes Texas policy could be a bit outdated and impact emerging industries. And what can we do to really confront these types of regulatory barriers?
I think the question was around regulatory barriers with power and the government regulating. Okay, sorry, we couldn't hear because I think the speakers are this way. I would just say, probably getting into the details is we probably don't have the time. But I think that what I would say is I think legislative groups are getting a lot smarter in trying to figure out how to create environments where data centers can grow. I think there's other groups that are struggling to figure out how to do that and are placing maybe items in legislation that I think a data center operator or a data center end user would look at and go, there's no way we'll go there. We will not disclose X, Y, and Z, so if that's in the legislation, it's really a non-starter. So I think the best thing I could recommend is that those groups would really educate themselves on the way that the data center industry is growing. And there's been areas where we probably should have done it differently. But the growth really, one of the reasons I love Dallas, and I love this market, and Texas as a whole, the same reason it's growing from a business perspective is the same reason it's going to grow from a data center, perspective. All the things that Trek and probably you and your businesses are working on are what's really setting up like the environment where this can grow. And I will tell you right now, Dallas and Texas is looked at as a market very favorably for data center growth. You're seeing it in our numbers. So, I don't know if there's anything you guys would add, but I would just, probably just end this by saying this is a great market. There's a lot of opportunities here. If you're not participating in it, I know the four of us, any questions you need to answer, we'd love to answer because we do need people, that will continue to help this market grow. So that being said, I'm gonna wrap us up here. A couple things, and then we'll get out of here. First, thank you for being here. Thank you for fighting the inclement weather. Well done. I want to thank the program sponsors here. Our silver sponsors were Patterson Real Estate Advisory Group, Rogers O'Brien Construction, the media sponsor, DCEO. I think you got a magazine in your seat when you sat down. The bronze sponsors, KFM Engineering and Design, Republic Title, Stewart Title National Commercial Services. So all the sponsors, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you very much for being here. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank our esteemed panelists. So let's give them a round of applause. Thanks, gentlemen. Well done. Good job. Once again, thank you all very much for letting us share with you. If you have questions, we'll stick around up the front for a little bit and have a terrific Tuesday. Thank you.